Good evening, Winnipeg. Good evening, Manitoba. And for all those joining us, I'd say live, but can't join us live because this is a Curvecast, not a live radio show. Good evening, everyone else. I am your host, Drew Mindell. We welcome you to the Illegal Curvecast alongside Ezra Ginsburg, known as Big Daddy there in the corner with his name bar, and Dave Minuk. I am your host, Drew Mindell, and it's good to see everybody on this Thursday evening, our third ever Curvecast. We'll be touching on the Winnipeg Jets, of course. We'll be touching on the NHL. We'll be touching on whatever other random stuff pops into our head in the next little while. We're going to be joined by our good buddy Andrew Hustler Paterson coming up here in a little bit. But gentlemen, nice to see you on this Thursday evening. I hope everyone's doing well.
Yeah, we're doing well, I think, right, Dave? We're having a good time doing the third Zoomcast here. I just had a couple of taquitos, some all-dressed chips in honor of today's snack draft on TSN 1290. So I'm nice and nourished for the Zoomcast.
Was there an actual dinner? Was there an actual dinner you had before that, or did you just have taquitos and chips for dinner?
Well, that was my dinner.
Okay. What about your kids? Did your kids have taquitos and chips?
No. So my kids were in bed very early tonight. As you know, kids usually have very, similar bedtimes. And usually my daughter goes to bed around, 6:37, and my son goes to bed, around 5:30 to 6.
Yeah.
And both kids were in bed by like 6 o'clock. And they had already had dinner. And also my wife, Naomi, also had dinner already. I know that you guys know what my wife's name is, but some people don't know her name. So I was on my own for dinner. And when I'm on my own for dinner, that means basically Little Caesars, Domino's, McDonald's, or 7-Eleven. And basically, as you know, I have a 7-Eleven halfway down the street.
The only difference between you now and, say, 10 years ago in your eating habits is that you have children, so sometimes you eat a little bit better, but otherwise, if you had to fend for yourself, you basically are a homeless person.
Absolutely. And
you resemble a homeless person based on your look right now, so it matches up all around. David, how are you? I hope you had something a little better than taquitos and all-dressed chips.
I did. I had some quality Italian food, so that was solid.
What did you have, Dave? Pizza, pasta?
I went pasta. Little arrabbiato.
Ooh.
Little penne arrabbiato. It was pretty good.
That sounds fancy.
It was a little fancy.
Yeah, fancy.
Although I went mild. I've been having the hotter lately, but today I decided to go take it down a notch. I wanted to save my heat for the Curvecast.
Yeah, Dave doesn't like the spice.
Dave does not like the spice. No.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we appreciate you saving your heat. Hopefully, you'll bring it in the next over the Curvecast as we get started here. And of course, the announcement came out earlier today from the NHL and the NHLPA that July 10th is the date that has been set for training camp. That coincides with an announcement from the provincial government that they're going to change the rules for everybody that's a professional athlete and allow them to come in without having to quarantine. So it does look like all systems are a go for the Winnipeg Jets to conduct training camp here in Winnipeg 1 month short a day from now. Good decision. July 10th, this sort of makes sense. There's nothing really what I would describe as surprising with the NHLPA decision, but it seems like come hell or high water, there's going to be hockey probably starting up at the beginning of August or second week of August.
Yeah, it looks like that right now. I mean, it's not guaranteed, but obviously, the NHL and the NHLPA wanted to finalize that date this week, right? And, a couple of weeks ago when we did that first Zoomcast, we knew that, that July 10th was kind of the date that they were targeting. We just didn't know, how close to that date it was going to be, right? So now you have the official date, and if you do the math, and Pierre LeBrun and Darren Drager talked about it today on Insider Trading. I mean, you're looking at the first week of August that they're aiming to get the play-in games going here, right? So it's good news, but you mentioned, Drew, that the Jets, among other teams, are able to get their training camp going. But if you read Mike McIntyre's tweets today, and our good buddy Scotty Billick was talking about it as well, I mean, we don't necessarily know that players coming from the U.S. and Europe are going to not have to go through that 14-day quarantine period, right? So players in provinces can come to Manitoba, but I mean, we assume that there's a good chance that that quarantine period is going to be waived. But as it stands now, I mean, you don't have any players on the Jets actually in Manitoba. I thought maybe the only guy that was in Manitoba might be Cody Eakin, because obviously he's from here. I know he has a home elsewhere, but I mean, it still looks like it's going to be, at least a week before we see the majority of the Jets actually come to town, right?
Yeah, I mean, I find it to be utterly ridiculous that they're going to give an exemption to these, to professional hockey players, that they don't have to do the quarantine that everybody else is obligated to do, or that the border is going to open up for these players where it's not going to open up for other players. But we know that, for better or worse, there's a higher importance placed on sports and athletes. And I mean, I find it to be silly that they get exceptional treatment where other people don't. But that's probably an argument for another day and another time. But it looks like all the lobbying and all the, I'm sure, behind the scenes negotiations and discussions have paid off for the NHL. And as a result, I guess one of the 3 Canadian cities that are in the running to be a hub city, or a hub for when the NHL returns, could still be in Canada. I sort of figured that that ship had sailed, but it sounds like it's not completely off the table just yet for that, Dave.
Well, obviously, while provincially, they may have let up, federally, it still hasn't been passed yet. So
no, it hasn't happened federally.
As of right now, it's still technically just a theory. Not until the federal government, approves it, then it's just a discussion point, obviously. And the other thing is, I could be wrong, but I think they said the obligation would be to self-isolate wherever they are for 14 days. Now, of course, I was thinking about it myself, and I saw it on Twitter. I was thinking to myself, like, well, wait a second. It's all well and good to be in Minneapolis or Michigan or Florida or Sweden or whatever, self-isolating at home. But then to get to Canada, unless you're flying on a jet, you're passing through security, you're interacting with people. So, I mean, like, any isolation you've done really is a moot, with the exception of the people who are driving, really.
You're saying that the direct flight from Helsinki to Winnipeg doesn't actually exist?
Yeah, exactly. So again, like, look, I talked about it last week. I said, I don't like the idea of opening things up. I think that, especially we're seeing down south, the numbers have gone crazy, and obviously this isn't a show about the pandemic, but that's just a reality, right? So you have to be aware of what's happening and aware of the job that we've done here in Manitoba. And so again, you don't want to see unnecessary risk for the general population in order for this to happen. So I'm hopeful that things will be done in a safe manner, but I don't love the idea of special circumstances. I mean, you're naive to think that the world doesn't work differently for professional athletes as it does for the average man or woman. Mm-hmm. So I'm not naive. I understand the way the world works. I'm just saying that in this sort of scenario, provided it can be done safely, then fine. But if you just got to make sure that it's being done with the greater good, which is the health of Manitobans.
Yeah, and you're 100% right, Dave. And as you know, if they don't waive that 14-day quarantine period, then I mean, it just means that these guys that are coming from the U.S., Sweden, Finland aren't going to be here as early as they would like, right? So that's ultimately why we expect that period to be waived.
Well, I mean, they more than that, Ezzy, if you're coming from the U.S. and you're trying to come into Canada right now, until the federal government declares you an essential business, you can't come over. The border is closed. So
yeah, that too, obviously, right?
Yeah. Now, I think the expectation is that tomorrow there might be an announcement from the federal government, tomorrow being Friday, we're recording this on Thursday, that there might be an announcement from the Canadian federal government sort of giving that exceptional status, which is, again, a little silly, more than a little silly. It's a lot silly. My in-laws can't come and see their grandkids because they live in Kentucky. But we're going to let it happen for professional athletes. Ridiculous, but that's a separate issue entirely.
And that's the only way it's going to work, right? Like if you don't allow American players into Canada, Canadian teams, like you heard Calgary's already planning, they've had a contingency plan. Apparently, they've had this for 2 months that they might have to go down and have their training camp in the US. And I don't think that's ideal, but I agree, guys. I mean, look, we all want to see hockey back. We hope, training camps start July 10th here in Winnipeg and, everywhere else. But
frankly, I don't care if the Jets, if they're having training camp, I'd rather that the border stay closed. There not be any exceptions made. Let them go have training camp in Grand Forks.
Well, I mean, but Drew, you gotta be realistic though. At the same time, you have truck drivers driving across doing commercial deliveries who are interacting. So let's be somewhat clear that there are people still coming across the border. So,
right, but I mean, I think which to me, the truck drivers and the supply chain and keeping that running are the people who need the exemptions. It deserve the exemptions. I don't know why athletes deserve the exemptions when it's
a pretty big boost to the economy. I mean, in terms of the monies that could be made, and the monies that it's going to cost for no season. So I mean, look, don't get me wrong. I don't put money over health ever, but I'm saying you have to factor it in. It's just it's a reality.
Right. And you have to think, Dave, that a team like the Toronto Maple Leafs are one of those teams that are probably being the most vocal, right? Because we know that the NHL probably wants to be in the U.S. I'm talking about the hub cities. They want to be in the U.S. and they ideally want to have a Canadian city, and Toronto and Vegas. I mean, you've heard all the insiders talk about Vegas, right? Makes a lot of sense in terms of, the time zone, because you can have, a couple of games in one day. So if you have a game that starts at, 4 p.m, well, then it's, 7 o'clock in the Eastern time zone, right? So you have to think a team like the Toronto Maple Leafs, I mean, they need their American players to be able to cross the border, right? So it's obviously not fair, but the only way this is going to work, it looks like, is if they open up the borders and give these NHL players special status.
Well, the U.S. has already given it to them, though. I just don't understand why Canada has to give it to them as well. The U.S., I mean, and we know what the U.S. is right now, and calling it a shit show would be probably complimentary in a lot of ways, especially with the COVID response. They've already given these exemptions. I don't know why Canada has to follow in suit. Let all the Canadian teams run their training camps somewhere right across the border, and then there's no issues.
So it's interesting because I think I saw something that the NBA for their training camps would be in their main cities for the first week, and then they would go to Orlando, be where they are. So the interesting thing for me is, are you bringing these guys to Winnipeg for a week and then they're going to go to Vegas? Because I agree with you, Drew. If that's the case,
looks like
what's the point?
Well,
if the hub city has the facilities to handle 8 to 12 teams or however they're going to break this up, and they can all be there, then just be there. What are you going to be home for a week? There's very little value in that.
They're talking about so July 10th. So let's let's play that out that you were just talking about, Dave. They're talking about being here July 10th to start training camp. They're not going to be playing any games here in Winnipeg. They're still talking about the exhibition games. Each team is going to play a number of exhibition games before the play-in round begins. They're playing those exhibition games in the hub city. So they're really coming to Winnipeg. Let's assume they come to Winnipeg, a week before July 10th. Let's assume they come to Winnipeg, on July 3rd. You're talking that they're going to be in Winnipeg for maybe 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So you're making all these exemptions and you're making all these exceptions for really 3 weeks for professional athletes when, if they're already, you could send them to the hub city early, or you could send them to another city in the U.S. that's got the facilities, Grand Forks, for example, with its, top with Ralph Engelstad and top-notch, arena they have there. I'm just saying it's quite ridiculous to your point, David.
I mean, I think what ultimately it shows, though, is that there's just a lot of things that are up in the air, and there's a lot of uncertainty still. So I think, because to the point of, they could come to Winnipeg if they're going to Edmonton. You know what I mean? If they're just going to be, if Edmonton ends up being the hub city versus Vegas.
Well, I mean, so the numbers in Winnipeg, I mean, the only reason why Winnipeg is not an option is because allegedly we don't have enough 5-star hotels. I mean,
look, quite frankly, I don't want 300 people in Winnipeg anyways.
No, I'm not complaining about that. But in terms of numbers and the virus itself, Winnipeg would be up to the top of the list. We have what, 7 cases in the province right now?
Yeah.
I mean, we haven't had a new case in 6 days. So I mean, it's only the amenities. The amenities not being quite good enough in Winnipeg is the reason why it's not in the running as one of the hub cities.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, no, I mean, sure. I mean, really, It's really just the hotel. It's not even just the amenities.
No, it's the hotel. So that's exactly what it is. It's there's
A lack of 5 stars.
I guess I don't know why Edmonton has so many more 5-star hotels, but that's a separate issue, I guess. That we.
How many 5-star hotels?
They're always welcome to stay in Ezzy's basement. It's
well, that is 5-star accommodations right there. Let me tell you. You get to see Ezzy without a shirt on at least multiple times in the course of the day.
At this point, guys, we're talking about training camp in July. I just want to see hockey being played. Like when you mentioned exhibition games there, Drew, that just got me really excited because
exhibition games should never get anybody excited.
Well, when there hasn't been live hockey in 3 months, I'm going to get excited for inter-squad scrimmaging. So let's just drop the puck. Like at this point, I realize you might have to make exemptions that not everybody are going to like. And again, I'm not saying that it's right, but I just want hockey to come back at this point.
Well, let's talk about some real hockey because, like you said, we're obviously going to have more in-depth analysis of the Jets and the Flames. We know that that's going to be the play-in matchup. And I was reading Travis Yost on TSN.ca earlier today. He broke down the series. I think he was on with our friends at TSN 1290 this afternoon as well. And Travis sort of broke down the series and he looked at some of the key matchups and everything else. And ultimately, his prediction was that the Jets should be able to defeat the Flames in 4 games. So I mean, that is certainly. I think a lot of people are expecting the Jets to be the favorite in that series, despite being the quote unquote 9 seed, not the 8 seed.
Look out! Here comes Huss.
Here comes Hustler trying to join us.
Don't have video yet.
Yeah, he's connecting the audio one thing at a time. Hustle will be here momentarily. But even earlier last week, I believe it was on The Athletic that they pulled they went by series and looked at each individual. And they talked to executives and they talked to coaches and I think they talked to somebody else and agents and the Jets had a clean sweep over the Flames as well. So I mean, the question I have for you guys, and once Huss is all technologically hooked up, he can join in on the conversation as well.
Let's start video, Huss.
Should the Jets be an overwhelming favorite? Should the Jets be the favorite, considered the favorite over the Flames when their best of 5 begins? A month from now? Well, not a month from now. I guess it would be more like 2 months from now.
Absolutely. And it's because of Connor Hellebuck. I mean, they've got the best goalie in there he is, the Hustler.
There we go.
On, Huss?
Now the Hansen quotient has been filled.
What's up?
Not too much, Huss. Thanks for joining us on this Thursday night, the Illegal Curve cast, as we are dubbing it. We're just getting started talking about the Jets and the Flames. And I asked these guys, should the Jets be considered the favorite over the Calgary Flames? Because that's sort of what all the prognosticators and all the experts so far are really siding with the Jets so far when they break down the series, albeit 6-7 weeks away before the series will actually begin. So that's sort of where we were at in our discussions.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I get it. I mean, I always look at the money first. In the Vegas, the Westgate Superbook, which was the first one to open up odds on the playoffs, had this as a pick'em. It was the closest matchup with any of the books. I saw another one that had the Jets as a significant underdog. So, where a bunch of people have picked the Jets, and at the end of the day, I really do think it is incredibly close. And yeah, I mean, maybe this is a bit of a Winnipeg bias on this, but the Jets have the best goalie, probably in the National Hockey League, certainly from this season. So if you're talking about splitting hairs between 2 pretty close teams, when we're talking about a 5-game playoff series, it's a pretty big tiebreaker on this one. I mean, I think you can give the Jets maybe the edge up at forward. Certainly Calgary's defense is stronger, but the Jets have come a long way since what we saw in the first half of the season. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of reason for Jet fans to be optimistic, but to call them favorites might be getting a little ahead of ourselves. Although I'm like you, Drew. I mean, I have seen a lot of people pick the Jets to be the team they think will make it through.
Yeah, I agree with you, Huss. I think you would call the Jets favorites, but not heavy favorites. Like, put it this way, I could see the Jets sweeping the Flames, but I could also see the Flames beating the Jets in 4 or 5 games. I would obviously take the Jets because, as you said, I mean, you've got the ace in the hole with Hellebuck coming off of the super year. So you have to give the Jets the edge there. And also the Jets have more game breakers. I mean, when you're talking about the Flames, you forget guys like Johnny Gaudreau and Sean Monahan. These guys were coming off of, big years, and they kind of were, having subpar years. Now these guys are still really good players. And, Matthew Tkachuk, I think, took a step forward this year. But I mean, when you're talking about, superstar talent, the Jets have the edge. When it comes to defense, maybe, it's a little bit closer, but definitely the Jets have the edge when it comes to goaltending. So even though, they might not be huge favorites, I think, most people are picking the Jets all day long.
Yeah, you mentioned Matthew Tkachuk in your answer there, Ezzy, and to me, he's sort of the X factor in sort of determining how this series might turn out. And I know obviously it's easy enough for me to say that on June 11th. Let's wait till August 11th and really break it down at that point in time. But when I was sort of looking at the matchups, it's Matthew Tkachuk. If the Jets can, not even that they have, just neutralize him, not let him be the agitator and the skillful player, because people forget how skilled of a player he is. I mean, because he's so good at getting under other people's skin, as we saw with his battles with Drew Doughty and everything else. If the Jets can just sort of keep him subdued, then I think that they have a good chance in this series. If Matthew Tkachuk is able to be the irritant and the skillful player that we know he could be, then I think that's what tipped the tide over to the Flames' advantage. But he is if I had to pick one player to watch in this series right now, Matthew Tkachuk is my answer, as he might be the determining factor which way the series goes, Dave.
Yeah, I'm still leaning towards Connor Hellebuyck being the big difference. I think the goaltending situation in Calgary, there's still some uncertainty there as to who's going to be the guy in between the pipes. And I think with Connor Hellebuyck, you're looking at that and you're thinking to yourself, is he going to be able to maintain? Is he going to be able to continue on? And obviously, everybody is starting at the same point, whenever this gets going again, as everybody else. So, you all start at square one, but you got to give the edge to Connor Hellebuyck just based on the way he's played this season. So, I mean, he's not a first-year guy. This isn't like something new to him. He's got the experience. He's got the capability of staying kind of ready for action. So I just default to Connor Hellebuyck. I think up front they're fairly even. I think, like I said, defensively probably give the edge to the Flames. But just at the end of the day, Connor Hellebuyck to me is probably going to be the biggest difference in this series.
Guys, you know what? I should mention, we had Travis Yost today on the program. I'm sure you probably saw the piece at tsn.ca. Probably talked about it already on him breaking down the stats side of things. And one thing that was really interesting, well, a couple things. First of all, I mean, for all the statistical disaster that the Jets were throughout this season, when you talk about all the analytics and the things that a guy like Yost really leans on, he still came back to the Jets as, the pick. And we talked somewhat about Hellebuyck, but he brought up a great point. Matthew Tkachuk is incredibly effective in a lot of ways. Part of it is driving other teams crazy and drawing penalties. Mm-hmm. And it's crazy we're saying this about the Winnipeg Jets, considering what this team was 2 years ago and before when Paul Maurice got here. But the Jets for the last year even more have been one of, if not the most disciplined team in the National Hockey League. I mean, there's not a lot of guys that are going to go full Drew Doughty and I want to say just buy into what Matthew Tkachuk's done. The Jets have been really, really good at that. And at even strength, you brought this up, and even I was surprised at it. The Jets outscored them at even strength by 18 goals. That is a lot. Yeah. So, I mean, so one of the things that kept the Jets by, and again, this is not a trait we've associated with this hockey club under Paul Maurice up until really the last couple of years, but the turnaround in discipline has been phenomenal. And I got to tell you, especially in a short series where one penalty, one power play goal can make all the difference, that's a big, big asset for Winnipeg. And they're going to need to lean on that and not get sucked into some of the antics that Matthew Tkachuk has made him so effective, both in the regular season and in the playoffs. That
was my point, is that this is a guy who's going to thrive. Every time he can goad you into a penalty, he's going to thrive on that. He's going to build on that. Matthew Tkachuk, to use a phrase that the kids are using nowadays, is living rent free in Drew Doughty's head. And every single game, he knows. What's that?
No kids are using that.
I don't know. What do I know about
that expression?
Yeah.
Kids don't
Drew their kids.
What are you talking about?
Yeah. In my mind, they're kids. Anyways, let me have my fun, Dave. That's
like Remus trying to buy Dickie D ice cream with Apple Pay.
We need a moment for that later on.
I'll tell you, this is definitely going. No jury would have convicted that Dickie D driver for slugging Remus when he tried to use Apple Pay. You know,
It's
no
outrageous.
jury would have convicted him.
Just the way Remus said it, Huss, as if he was expecting them to maybe have it.
Yeah.
Can't you just picture Remus with that little face of his? Hey, do you take Apple Pay?
I have no cash. Any chance I could just quickly tap the Apple Pay and grab a couple?
You know
of
anybody, Huss, that runs out to the ice cream truck without cash? Like, is it a common thing for people to pay for Dickie D with a credit card?
In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's never, ever happened before, ever, until today. And it wasn't even a credit card. It was, in fact, the next level Apple Pay. I'm surprised you didn't ask if they took Bitcoin.
Are you paying for your firecracker? Will that be American Express or MasterCard?
I mean, we were at the park maybe about a month ago, and the Dickie D guy came by, and I don't remember the last time I saw a Dickie D guy to begin with. I was shocked that they're still, you know, cycling around. But I'll tell you what, kids came from miles away. It seemed like they started running as soon as they heard those bells.
Was it a bike or a truck? Was it a bike or a truck?
It was a bike. A guy on a bike came by.
Old school.
Old school, exactly right. We were having a nice afternoon at the park, and out of nowhere, the Dickie D guy comes on the truck, and these kids
Those
just
bells.
swarmed.
Once you hear those bells, you know what's coming.
Yeah, you're 100% right. But
they used to have a huge fleet in the city, and I mean, I don't know how many of those are still going. Apparently, there's a truck as well, but it is true. I mean, hell, you can be in your mid-40s and you hear those bells, and you kind of like forget what you're doing, and all of a sudden you want an ice cream.
I started panicking. I'm like, oh my god, I left my wallet at home. I gotta go. We have to go home real quick and get the wallet. And
Apple Pay not going to bail you out.
No, I also do enough not to ask to use Apple Pay.
No, I was going to say, every time you hear the ice cream truck, and it just came by, I know when it was because it was my daughter's second birthday.
Yeah,
my wife, Naomi,
be honest, the ice cream truck is sitting in front of your house because you're putting that guy's kids through college right now.
No, but, yeah, it's funny. No, but Huss, you know what I mean? It's like every time you hear that ice cream truck, it seems like it's like 3 blocks away, but you still hear it. Like every time you go out, the ice cream truck is not that close to you. And then eventually a couple of minutes later, then you see it and then it comes down the street. But it's funny how that always works.
Yeah, Izzy, I think Drew's onto something here. You know, like the beer guy at the Goldeye game spends, like he knows the sections where the guys are drinking and basically spends the whole game there.
Yeah.
That is your neighborhood with the Dickie D guy. He pretty much knows where Chateau Ginsburg is, and he's not missing your block on the route. Put it that way.
By the way, Haas, just so you know, at the Goldeyes games, he knows where Ezzy sits as well.
I was gonna say, yeah. And if it was legal for him to sell beer out of a cart in front of Ezzy's house, he would do that. He would do that also. He would just drive slowly behind his car at all times.
Shout out to all the Dickie D drivers.
There you go. They're the sponsors of, I guess, this evening's Illegal Curve Zoomcast. We call it the Curvecast. Drew Mandel, Ezra Ginsburg, Dave Minuk. We're also joined by Andrew Hustler Paterson, talking about the Jets and the Flames, breaking down that series. You know, when you're looking at a best of 5, you know, a quickie series like that, where it's so essential that you get off to a good start, you maybe have one game that you can have a buffer for. Does that potentially, you know, maybe equalize the goaltending battle a little bit? Because usually in a best of 7, the best goaltender is going to separate from the other goaltender. But when you're in a short series like that, could that maybe play into the advantage of Talbot or David Riddick versus Hellebuyck? Because everyone would say Hellebuyck's the better goaltender or surely has been over the course of the season. But in the quickie series where a goalie can get hot very quickly and another goalie might be trying to find their game, does that maybe give a bit of an edge to the Flames or help them out on a one-sided battle?
I mean, no, I don't think so. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, if you're going to go into a deciding game or an incredibly important game, you want to have the best goalie, and the Jets have that guy. But to your point, I think because of the short series, there's no wiggle room. I mean, you can be the best, but if you don't play that way, if you have a really off game, it can completely sink the entire operation. So, you know, do the Jets have the advantage in goaltending? Absolutely. It's all on paper. Everything can change. I mean, to your point, Drew, I mean, one poorly played shot, one random trip behind the net, rolling around with the puck. I mean, you know, things can change quickly. So, I mean, it's incumbent on Hellebuyck and everyone to be at their best early and not give any freebies to the opposition. And if that happens, I think they'll be good. One
Pekka Rinne's performance in Game 7, and you're done in a best of 5 series like that.
Well, yeah, and Huss is bang on. I mean, when you're talking, I mean, it's a coin flip almost in some series when you're talking, you know, the first round best of 7. When you're talking about, you know, best of 5, you know, play-in series, I mean, you know, Huss mentioned, Travis Yost was on the afternoon ride today, and, he broke it down and, gave the Jets the edge, when it comes to most categories. But, it almost seems like every year when it's the first round of the playoffs, Huss, we overanalyze it. And it almost seems like, whichever team has the hotter goalie or whoever has the hotter line is the team that usually wins the series, right? And, you look at a team like the Flames, and we talked about it earlier, if, guys like Johnny Gaudreau and Sean Monahan, if those guys aren't clicking, but then you got the Scheifele, Wheeler, Connor line clicking, I mean, it's pretty obvious. I mean, the Jets are going to be the team that wins the series, right? And you could obviously go the other way, and you could say that, if the Jets' big guns aren't clicking, then and the Flames' big guns are clicking, then they'll win the series. But ultimately, it seems to come down to those pretty basic factors, right? And I think that if you played this series 4 or 5 times, I mean, the Jets probably should win it. I mean, this Flames team, I just think, they're too top heavy and they have too many holes, but we'll see what happens. But, the way the Jets were playing at the end of the season, 4 wins in a row, and both teams are going to be pretty healthy. I mean, minus the exception of, a guy like Brian Little. I mean, there's all the reasons for the Jets to be successful against the Flames.
Hey, it's okay to be top heavy if your top guys are getting the job done and you're getting a little bit of chip in lower down in the lineup. But I mean, listen, I think that if we were having this conversation about the playoffs starting right after the pause, we could say all these things about the Jets kind of clicking. But I mean, the biggest thing about this, and I know you guys have talked about this, I mean, who the hell knows what we're going to get from any of these teams, any of these players? And the fact that it is a best of 5 coming right out of this training camp and go time, honestly, I think it is as wide open as it'll be. And Blake Wheeler talked about it. If you're lucky enough to come out of that best of 5, I mean, I think a team like the Jets, if they were lucky enough to get through, would have some real momentum and be dangerous going forward. But I mean, who the hell knows what we're going to see in game 1 and in game 5? I mean, we saw that last year with Columbus doing what they did to Tampa. Add in the variables of 3+ months off, and well, let's just say it'll be very interesting.
Well, Huss, to your point there, you mentioned about Blake Wheeler's comments, and if you get through the best of 5, you got maybe some momentum going into the where the best of 7s are going to start. Let me ask you guys this, and Dave, I want to ask you guys, ask you first, and then we'll get Huss and Ezzy in on this one. If the Jets get through, why can't the Jets make a run? When you look at their roster and you look at, how weird this playoffs is going to be, why can't the Jets make a run if they do get through the Flames in the best of 5?
Well, I wouldn't say why can't they. I would say I think they can. I think the point is, as Huss said, you've got one of the best goaltenders in the NHL in net for you. You've got some of the top firepower in the NHL, and the reality is everybody's healthy. So you've got every one of those guys, like you said, with the exception of Brian Little, being healthy. Once this playoffs get going or the play-in series gets going. So I don't see a reason why the Jets couldn't. I mean, like, we saw the defense, again, they got maligned throughout the year. They're terrible. They can't do this. But the truth is that we saw them playing better as the season, unfortunately for them, came to a pause. And so you've got guys like Morrissey and DeMello and allowed Kulikov to slide back down in the lineup, which is where he should have been, and allow him to play that role. And so, when you got the 5-6 guys, like Pullman is in a better spot for him, and Pionk is in a good spot. So I think that the reality is that because you'll have a healthy Jets team, and obviously you got to assume that they're healthy going in through the play-in series, which could be a heavy series between them and the Flames. But like Drew, I can't answer. I can't say why can't they, because I think they can. I think it's entirely possible that with and I think the one thing when we were talking about this, I think last week was I think it'll be phenomenal whatever team does. Like, I don't think there's an asterisk, because if you can win 19 games to win this Stanley Cup, the only thing that's the asterisk is the fact that everybody was pretty much on equal footing versus like the Bruins, who were like the clear best team in the NHL pretty much at the at the pause, and maybe 1 or 2 other teams that were kind of hot. But the reality is everybody's at square one, and if you can build the momentum from the play-in series, because I think the play-in series, the round robin isn't going to have the same emotion as the play-in series, obviously. So you're going to have these teams that have just won. They have the mentality now of winning a playoff series, they're not going to think of it as a play-in series. They're going to think of it as a playoff series. And if they win it, well, that's the first of 5 series they'll have to win the Stanley Cup. So I think the Jets would, to be honest with you, I think they'd be in a really good position to win a Stanley Cup.
Yeah, Dave, there will be upsets. I mean, we don't know, obviously who the teams will be yet, but it's going to happen. It could be Montreal, it could be Columbus, it could be, Calgary, who knows, right? But I mean, it's a guarantee that in that play-in qualification round, there's going to be upsets. I mean, Huss mentioned it. I mean, nobody saw Columbus winning that series, especially, sweeping the Lightning, right? So it's almost a guarantee that you're going to see some upsets. And, who knows what's going to happen, like Huss said. But, I mean, would anybody be surprised if, Montreal went on a little run? I mean, you got Carey Price in net, right? So, yeah, I mean, the Jets could absolutely go on a long run.
Ezzy, it's funny you mentioned Montreal. I got a chance to catch up with Max Domi today. We'll have that tomorrow on the afternoon ride. And we were talking, they've got a juvenile diabetes event that's happening on Sunday. So we talked a little bit about that. But then we got to, the playoffs. And he said, obviously, they feel very fortunate and invigorated and excited that they've got the opportunity. But it basically came down to this. I mean, every team, and we can talk about the Jets, but the Montreal Canadiens, Dave, as you pointed out, are in the exact same situation. Every underdog in this situation is going in with a why not us mentality. Yeah. And I'll tell you what, the coaches on the teams for like the Boston Bruins or the St. Louis Blues, these teams that are, in that top 4, I mean, I know they were pushing to have games that actually meant something, which, is obviously only going to hinder the number 1 seeds. They could just drop down. But, I mean, those teams are going to need to be ready right out of the gate because you come in from 3 round-robin games to determine seeding and take on one of these teams that's just won. And, I mean, it's going to be a dangerous situation. I'll be very interested to see how the odds makers book those series for the teams that have come on and we've seen them play well to beat an opponent as opposed to these other teams that have essentially been waiting around for almost 4 months to play.
Well, you mentioned the odds makers, Huss, and it was obviously when the NHL came out with, when they announced the playoff format and they came out with the odds to win the Stanley Cup. So this would have been, maybe 3 weeks ago now. And the Jets had some crazy long odds, and it was
66 to 1, I think.
Yeah, it was something like that. It was one of the worst of all the playoff teams there. And I'm thinking to myself, first of all, with the caveat, the odds makers tend to be right more often than not. But I looked at it, I just don't understand why the Jets would be such long shots at this point in time. I mean, goaltending they have, high power offense with the guys that, we don't need to name, obviously. And their defense, which obviously was the Achilles heel throughout the course of the year. Well, I mean, the Jets defense, that we saw from October through February is not the same defense that we saw at post-trade deadline. The defense with Dylan DeMello, his presence just added so much to that defense that they no longer looked like the tire fire that they were in their own zone for so much of the year. It was almost like there's almost, the first part of the season when Hellebuyck was otherworldly, and then the second part where Hellebuyck was still excellent, but he also had a defense in front of him for the first time this year to speak of.
Hey, DeMello was such a key acquisition, and I know you guys look at some of the tape and you look back after the game and just the quiet confidence that he instilled on that blue line and the ability to just do the simple things, get the puck out of the damn zone, give it to the forwards that can go and make something happen. And he was so good on that. And if you look at the Yost article, and again, I don't get too much into those numbers, but they had the list of all the forwards, and you look at, Scheifele was a 12.5, Ehlers was 11.4, and you look at Kyle Connor was a 0.0, and that speaks to maybe some of the defensive issues he's had. DeMello stuck out big time with the difference he had. I think he was about 4.8.
Something like that. He was in the fours.
And I mean, it was a number that sort of stood out. And it's another conversation, I guess, we'll have about how important it will be for the Winnipeg Jets if they can keep him in the loop and get him signed for a few more years to be a part of the business. But you're right. I mean, that was a quiet move, but one that made a real significant difference on the Jet blue line. And that was the biggest area of need for the hockey club.
Yeah, it certainly was.
DeMello was exactly what the Jets needed, Huss. And, when you talk about matchups, I mean, he's a prototypical shutdown guy, right? And he plays a simple game, as you mentioned. He gets the puck out. He makes those really good plays. And, he's not a guy that, you expect to pop in a lot of G's, but he definitely made the Jets D, that much better. And, it was maybe a little bit of a weakness before they got him, but not anymore. I mean, he's a really good defenseman, very underrated defenseman.
How many minutes do you guys think he plays a night? If, they were starting tomorrow, everyone's healthy, just remembering the team. I mean, I bet that number for DeMello would be 23, 24 minutes a night come playoff time.
Probably. Yeah.
No
I was
question.
thinking 21 to 23 for sure.
Yeah, I mean, him and Morrissey are going to be your shutdown pair. They're going to be on the ice, every opportunity. They're going to get all their extra minutes when you can, use the TV timeouts to your advantage and everything else. He will be a workhorse for the Jets on the blue line. There's no question about that. You mentioned Travis Yost, and they were in that article. They were going through some of the numbers, and they were talking about the penalty kill. And the Jets, the numbers, if you just look at the numbers for the penalty kill for the Jets, you don't do any bit of a deeper dive, they're pretty misleading because, we remember back in November, December, when we were talking about the Jets having, a historically awful penalty kill. And then come the new year, come January, come February, if you change the dates where you're looking at the stats, the Jets had I think it was either the best or the second best penalty kill in the entire NHL from January 1st until the pause occurred. So this is a defense, a special teams that looks on paper pretty bad because you're looking at the numbers including October, November, and December, but certainly it turned things around come January and February. So I mean, again, this Jets team is sort of sneaky. Now, I think maybe they're getting more publicity as people are beginning to talk them up a little bit, and we'll continue to talk them up as we get closer to the start of training camp. But right now, at 66-1 odds, you can certainly talk yourself into laying a few shekels on that.
Yeah, hey, listen, the one thing I'll say just about future bets, I mean, usually the odd makers are pretty good with focusing on particular games. They know exactly what's happened in the last week or two and are pretty accurate. So much of future bets is about attention. And listen, the Jets have been playing catch-up all season long. They've been out of the playoffs. They've sort of been forgotten. They're in the smallest market. It doesn't surprise me that there is great value on the Winnipeg Jets. I think probably the 45 to 50 number is a little more accurate. We have to remember there are still 24 teams going into this. But you make a good point, Drew. I mean, listen, and at some point, if people are sleeping on you, it's a good thing. They'll wake up and realize that you're there by the time you get to the finish line if you're lucky enough to be there.
No question. Let's move away from why not the Jets and ask this question. I mean, it's the yearly question that we have to ask about when you're talking about the Winnipeg Jets and you're talking about the playoffs. Who's the second line center for this Jets team when game one of the playoffs begins? And we know that Brian Little's status is still up in the air. Who knows? I mean, that's going to be something we'll find out closer to the start of training camp. So I'm not going to speculate on that. But let's assume that he's not around. So who is the second line center, presumably between Ehlers and Laine when this playoff matchup gets underway?
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in first, I guess, Drew. I mean, everybody knows who the options are, right? It was obviously Cody Eakin, before the season was paused. But, I mean, you only have so many options, right? And I think we talked about this, back in March when we were still on TSN 1290, before the COVID pandemic hit. And I mean, Jack Roslovic is a guy that I know that Dave is really high on, but, Roslovic is a guy that, hasn't really played a significant period of time, I should say, being a second line center in the NHL, right? So, I mean, you're looking at, is Andrew Kopp an option as a second line center? He's had a cup of coffee as a second line center, but I think we know that, he's kind of better suited in that third line role. Nothing against him, but he's a guy that can play top six, but it's a tough question, right? I think, Huss would probably agree. I mean, you don't have the luxury of a Paul Stastny, right? Like you did in 2018. So, I mean, you got to go with, one of Cody Eakin, Andrew Kopp, or Jack Roslovic. And as far as I'm concerned, I mean, all three of those guys have strengths and weaknesses. And I'm not giving you a cop-out answer, Drew.
So far you are.
I don't know the answer because, it could very well be Cody Eakin. But I think.
Oh, I think it will be. I mean, I would be shocked if it wasn't coming out of the gate. I mean, that was the way things finished. Things were going very well for the Winnipeg Jets. I mean, I know some of the analytic numbers didn't look great on that line, but they were making some things happen. The other guys were getting opportunities. And let's face it, Cody Eakin does have, you know, certainly a very good checking role to his game. There's a defensive aptitude that I think is attracted to Paul Maurice. And you're going into these most important games. And, you know, let's call a spade a spade. Patrick Laine and Nikolai Ehlers need a guy that can really get it done in both ends of the ice and try and just open up things for them. And that's why I think really the two guys you mentioned, Andrew Kopp and Cody Eakin, really are the only two options. I mean, Jack Roslovic has some offensive talent. He hasn't played any center at all. And to think that he can just roll in there and handle the center matchup at that second line center, I think is totally unrealistic. So I'd be stunned if Maurice didn't start it off with Eakin right off the bat. But I think Andrew Kopp proved a lot to Maurice through the years, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if at some point, if things weren't clicking on that line, he got the opportunity because he can handle his weight in both ends. And I think he's learning that it is more about facilitating high-end wingers like Ehlers and Laine to show them what they can do. And really, you got to do a lot of the dirty work back in your own end to make sure you're not pulling it out behind your goalie.
Dave?
Well, I know, and I'm with Hudson as I think 100% it's going to be Eakin because that's the way things ended. And there was, you know, Mark Scheifele was being interviewed the other day, and he was talking about kind of the chemistry that those three were displaying together in the last few games. So my suspicion would be that you'd start with Eakin. Again, we don't know what the status of Brian Little is. When Kevin Cheveldayoff spoke a few weeks back, he basically said, look, I've got 16 healthy forwards. Well, there's 17 forwards on the lineup, and Brian Little would most likely, he didn't say Brian Little, but you have to assume he meant Brian Little was the one guy he wasn't referencing. So my guess is Brian Little's probably not going to be an option at that point. But again, it's a ways away before we find that out. But I think you go with Eakin to start. I think there's also a lot to be gained from having Andrew Kopp and Adam Lowry on that third line together and all the heavy lifting. And Mark Scheifele talked about that and the benefit that he gains from having Kopp and Lowry out there doing what they do against the opposition. And then Scheifele, Wheeler, Connor, for example, get to come on and they get a lot easier of a situation because Lowry, Kopp just did some big work in the opposition zone. So I think that there's a lot to be said for having Kopp with Lowry and Eakin maybe with the other two. So that would be my guess to see things start. And yeah, I like Roslovic. I like what he was able to do with the Moose. I think he hasn't been in the center role enough, really, other than when he was, on the fourth line with the class of 2015, Harkins and Appleton. But I mean, again, I don't suspect you're going to see that in the play-in series. Maybe you'll see that next year. But my guess is Roslovic will be on the way.
Hey, one thing I should mention, and I didn't, is, of course, if you want my personal opinion, who the best guy in that spot is, it's Blake Wheeler. And I don't think that will happen coming out of the gate. I mean, I think they got kind of Scheifele back into a good headspace and, playing better than he had been for a long time, and the team was winning. So I think Paul Maurice will go with that. But I'll tell you what, if things aren't clicking on the second line and the first line isn't scoring, I think you go to that, what was thought of as a nuclear option for a long time to break up that first line. Bottom line is that move of Wheeler to center earlier in the season after Brian Little got hurt, it saved the season. I don't think there's any way you can call it anything other than that. So that is one card that Paul Maurice will have in his deck. And I think if it's not going well for the Jets and it looks like they're going down, I'd be stunned that he didn't play that card before they shake hands.
That's probably the card he plays if they lose the first two games in the best of five, because that's the problem.
Like that. Yeah.
You don't have the luxury to wait to see if your team can figure things out or maybe find their sea legs. You might be out, you might be done before if you wait for that, and that's the problem. I mean, that's the equivalent of pulling Toby Enstrom out of your lineup in Game 5 against the Golden Knights and putting in Dmitry Kulikov when he hasn't played in 4 months. I mean, we saw Maurice go for the nuclear option back in the Western Conference Final against the Golden Knights, and obviously didn't work back then. And we know how Toby Enstrom's time ended with the Jets franchise. But to your point, that is sort of when he would have to pull that plug and pull that card, is if they're down 2-0 and early on against the Flames, and they need a spark, and that could be the spark that he uses.
Yeah, and it could be a mid-game one too. I mean, I think it's important to know that Maurice does know that he has tried this before, and there were some very, very good results, for the hockey club. And a big part of that is Mark Scheifele. I mean, what happens if he doesn't have Wheeler with them, and where he's at? But I mean, hey, hopefully it doesn't get to that. I mean, if that top line can come out firing and get it done, they can literally carry a second line that maybe isn't, as long as they're not getting scored on. But again, as we mentioned, if things are going in a wrong direction, and Maurice really thinks he needs to press the button, that will be the move that, he makes. And if it doesn't work, we're talking about next season.
You're absolutely right. And Dave, you have an article on illegalcurve.com. I'm the company man for that plug, of course, talking about, the roster, the expanded roster that the Jets might have when this playoff series or the play-in series begins. And most people don't remember that the Jets actually already have 16 forwards up. That doesn't include Brian Little, but 16 forwards up at the NHL level. So they're probably not going to rely on any call-ups from the Manitoba Moose like they would if this was typical circumstances. They might call a couple guys up to travel with the team, but I don't foresee any of the Moose players getting any time in any of these playoff series. Do you, Dave?
No. I mean, they've got 16 healthy forwards. Again, Little would make it 17, and they've got 10 defensemen. So, I mean, the reality is you don't really need anybody. They'll pull Comrie, maybe Burden up just to give them the experience, give them some goaltenders. So they're allowed unlimited goalies. And right now the number I saw was 28. Some people are projecting as high as 32. But no, I mean, I think they'll bring, like we already saw Cheveldayoff said that there's not going to be, like, you're not going to have Heinola or Sandberg. So realistically, you're going to have someone like David Gustafsson, who is doing really well with the Manitoba Moose. It'll be a good experience for him to come up and have that experience. He's not going to play, but he'll get a chance to be around those guys. And maybe the only other two guys I really saw as possibilities, Andrei Shibasov, I didn't write him in the article. He could be in there because he was obviously got into a couple games with the Jets. And I thought CJ Cease or Christian Vesalainen, a lot of people kind of are down on him, but him and Gustafsson have a really good chemistry. They played really well together. They've got a really good friendship off the ice, and they do really well. I think I want to say they played about 10 games together to end the season for the Moose. So they were on the same line. They were doing real well. Helps that Vesalainen spent 2 seasons in Sweden, so he speaks some Swedish, and so they can speak in Swedish together when they're playing. But yeah, I mean, to your point, Drew, I don't think any of the Moose are going to make an impact. I don't think any of them are going to play. But I think they'll get an experience. I think it'll be good for Jets prospects to get up and be around the team and that sort of thing.
You never know, though, Dave, right? I mean, especially if, the Jets do beat the Flames and go to the next round and in a deep run with injuries, right? You might see a guy like, David Gustafsson or, you mentioned Christian Vesalainen and CJC. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you don't expect those guys to play. You expect them to be the Black Aces, but I mean, you never know. And the Jets have so much depth. I mean, you mentioned Jansen Harkins earlier. I mean, he was really, coming along, on that class of 2015 line. So
I was going to ask,
see other guys from the Moose play, for the Jets, but
he's got to be in the lineup. Never mind a Black Ace.
Well, that was my question. Is Jansen Harkins one of your 12 forwards?
He's for me. I
wasn't saying Jansen Harkins was a Black Ace. I was talking more about Gustafsson and Vessel.
Yeah, no, for sure. But it just when we have in there, I mean, but just to Drew's point, I mean, I was so impressed with Jansen Harkins. We talked to Pascal today. I asked him, the most positive, thing coming out of this season. And he immediately went to Harkins about, how he earned his way. But it wasn't just earning his way and getting a chance to play in the NHL. It was what he showed when he was up here. And here's the thing. I mean, guys, we've been doing this for a while. I mean, think of every playoffs. I mean, I think of Sammy Blais last year for the Blues. He wasn't even playing against the Jets in the first round. And by the end, he's an impact player in the Stanley Cup Finals. So, I mean, to me, Harkins, Mason Appleton as well, I'll throw him in that group. I mean, guys that I think will be absolutely reveling any opportunity they get. And to be honest, I mean, that good young youth in the bottom 6 of the Winnipeg Jets, along with a guy like an Adam Lowry or Andrew Kopp. I mean, to me, that is the sort of teams that do well in the playoffs have groups like that actually step up and perform. And all we've seen from those guys is continuing to raise their level of play. And I think Harkins especially, but Appleton as well could be big. And I'd be real disappointed if they weren't at least on the fourth line in the lineup in game number 1 of whatever playoff series we're talking about.
Well, this is Paul. I mean, Paul Maurice is the one man making these decisions, and we know how much he tends to default towards veterans. So, I agree with you.
Those guys did a lot for him, though. I mean, it's not like we're talking about. I mean, I think they really did prove themselves. Heck, we saw Harkins at one point playing up with the big boys and on that top line. So, I mean, I would say I think Maurice is working with a body of work through 70 games, and I'd be surprised if those guys didn't earn their way into it. But hey, listen, I mean, he is a guy with a lot of experience, and there's no doubt that, there are some things that some veterans can bring at this time. But I'd be surprised if those guys were impact players and, getting not just a few shifts, but, getting the opportunity to make a difference right out of the gate.
Huss, you mentioned Pascal. You had Pascal on, and you did a pre-tape with Max Domi, and it's going to air tomorrow. And Drew's not going to like this that I'm going on a tangent here, but we're talking Jets. But can we talk about the new mayor of Grand Forks? Speaking of guests on your show today, Brandon Bochenski, the new mayor of Grand Forks. How was that interview?
You know what? It was awesome. He was really, really good. We always remember him. I mean, Remus pointed out he was a hot fantasy pick coming out of the lockout because he had a great preseason. And, the guy, he had a great college career, bounced around a number of spots in the NHL, and then went and played with Dozzy and the guys out in Kazakhstan for like 7 or 8 years. He talked about being the captain there and not speaking English, and they had a Finnish coach. So he had like multiple translators at times taking messages through 2 languages to the Russians. He was great. But what a wild story. I saw a hockey guy following Grand Forks kind of making a hockey joke after Bochinski wins the mayoral election, and I just assumed it was a UND joke because the guy had the same name. Never in a million years did I think it was actually Brandon Bochinski. The guy just retired a year ago. Now he's apparently the mayor of Grand Forks.
And I mean, the mayor he defeated had been mayor for 20 years or something.
Hey, you don't go in and blow out 20-year incumbents that easily. So he was obviously doing something right, or as they say in politics, it was time for a change.
Oh,
Did I also read that wasn't Bochenski also traded for the sheriff? Wasn't there a trade involving Shane Knighty? I thought I read that I'd have to go look it up.
Both
but
of those guys played for a number of teams. I don't have the transaction right off the head, but if that's true, Ezzy, I'll give you major dap for just pulling that one.
Aren't you supposed to be doing this research before you come on air, Ezzy? Isn't that how it's supposed to work? You're supposed to, research your points.
Well, no, I mean, I always listen to Huss's show, and he had Andy Sutton on. What was that yesterday, Huss? And Andy Sutton was talking about playing with Shane Knighty and JP Vigier in Atlanta with the Thrashers, and then I was reading an article about Brandon Bochenski being named mayor, and I could have sworn that he was traded for Shane Knighty. Maybe Dave can look it up or something. Because
why does Dave have to look it up?
I don't know. I mean, I guess I could too. I'm trying to focus on the Zoomcast, Drew.
The best part about this though is that Ezzy was one who introduced Bochenski's topic.
Oh yeah,
he'd have this info at his hands.
Just a complete stream of consciousness.
Hold on, but I did do the work.
A stream of non sequiturs for sure.
Here it is. Boston Bruins acquire Shane Knighty, a 2008 6th-round pick, turned out to be Nicolas Tremblay, that the Ducks previously relinquished, swap 2000. Okay, whatever, that doesn't matter. For Brandon Bochenski.
Yeah, see, wow. I thought I saw that.
January 2nd, 2008.
There you go. Yeah.
Golf clap.
Well done, Ez.
I think we have to leave it on a high note. I don't think we're going to be able to beat that. Any final words? I guess Ezzy, you got to go first because you pulled out that trade out of your ass. So go ahead.
Well, I mean, we have to talk about the snack draft that took place today on the afternoon ride on TSN 1290, and Remus telling a story about how he tried to buy Dickie D ice cream with Apple Pay. I just absolutely love that snack draft, Huss. I loved your picks. I had to tune out after the 3rd round because I had to go.
He was in a diabetic coma at that point in time.
No, but Huss made some good picks. I heard the Coke Slurpee.
I'm getting a lot. And Coke Slurpee, for the record, I picked it first because I knew it deserved to be picked there. Yes. It is the most popular. But in my own personal power poll, I'm going with a lime orange mix. Those are my top two. I don't mind Coke, I don't mind Coke. It is one of those things. But to be honest, most of you know, if you see me hanging out outside Sev, I probably have a big gulp, not a Slurpee, which is not a very Winnipeg thing to admit. But it was a hell of a lot of fun. The amount of I put out that list of the top 5 worst chocolate bars, which include Big Turk at 1, Eat More at 2, the Cherry Blossom at 3. What else do we have? We had the Sweet Marie. Oh, and the Cuban Lunch. And
I haven't heard of what's a Cuban lunch.
I never heard of that one either.
Dinner, but
Cuban lunch is an old school, and you guys maybe are just young enough to have kind of missed it. It was made by Paulins here in Winnipeg. I learned all this today. I thought it was maybe a Nutty Club thing.
And it's older than all of us.
It's like a chocolate peanut thing. It came in a little square. It did not look very good to begin with. Then it was just sort of so. It went out, and now it's apparently been brought back. However, it's not quite. I didn't think it was good to begin with, and apparently the new kind is even worse. So it made that list. But my God, the polarization of the Big Turk is unbelievable. We did a poll, about 63% said it was horrible, but then there was 37% people that said it was actually good. No idea, but there's few things that can get you going more than a good argument about the best chocolate bar, chips.
You didn't even respond. Huss, I sent you my list. You didn't even respond. I'm so disappointed.
You know what? I have a feeling I may have missed. I can't even tell you. The inbox, I could not keep up. Dave, I will go back, check that out, and I promise you I'll reply to you, and I apologize.
I had Twix in there. I had peanut butter Twix.
Twix? You know what? How did Twix not even get a mention today?
That's what I mean.
Well, I'll tell you how it didn't get a mention. Did you see Rick's draft? Rick's draft needs a 30 for 30 on Rick's draft. I don't know what that was, but that was an abomination.
We could do a 30 for 30 on all of the drafts if we went through. I mean, I'll tell you what, Rick is a great co-host. He does a lot of things well, but if I'm hiring a scouting staff or anything, Rick probably he'll be in another area of the operation, not making the picks on draft.
Huss, I agree with Drew. I mean, I think he starts off really strong, right? Like deep fried pepperoni, we know, I mean, everybody, that's ever listened.
Fried pepperoni in a conveniencance store?
He didn't want to. Well, you know what? I guess
in the Maritimes, Drew. I mean, I've never been to Halifax, but I think where his draft board falls apart was with the ginger ale, because then he goes Revelo ice cream bar and then Wagon Wheel. I mean, talk about polarizing, Huss. I mean, the Wagon Wheel is also a very polarizing treat.
I sort of like that Wagon Wheel pick, at 6, just because it reminds me of Hot Dog Day from elementary school. I don't know if you ever had the Wagon Wheel hot dogs, but that was kind of my introduction to it. And this sort of thing was a big throwback to, being able to roll into whatever your local convenience store is and get 1 or 2 things. And we went through it, and it was a hell of a lot of laughs. We got a crazy amount. Like, the text line has not popped like that in a long, long time. And now everyone was hungry and probably went to 7-Eleven right after the show.
There you go.
I actually did buy, Huss, I'm not going to lie, I did go and buy like 5 different chocolate bars, including a Mirage, which I haven't had in a while.
So they still make the Mirage, eh?
They still make the Mirage.
It's like if you combined a Kit Kat Chunky and an Arrow.
Yeah. The Mirage.
Dave, are you going to do a candy bar lineup?
I thought about that. I was actually going to tweet that out. There could be a candy bar lineup. By the way, you know what's an unheralded drink? Could have been mentioned? Tahiti treat.
Ooh, you know what, dude? There's a lot of people that back when the border was open would cruise down to Grand Forks. Like, oh, you're going to Grand Forks? Can you grab me a couple cases of Tahiti treat?
You know what? Cool. Frosty was bringing them in for a while, and I remember I had one for the first time in 1,000 years. It's like, this is the greatest drink ever.
Huss, can we talk about Remus's pink Powerade pick? Like, what's going on there? I didn't even realize there was pink Powerade.
Who did? When was the last time you were in at Sev and looked up at the wall of Gatorade and Powerade and even saw a pink one?
Look, there's one thing we can all agree on.
Them online, or maybe you got a case at Costco and thinks that they're available everywhere.
Look, there's one thing we can all agree on. Remus is an idiot.
Oh.
Hey, that's not nice. Remus is a good
we can agree on that. I mean, I love the guy, but I'm not listening to him for advice.
He was great today. We missed him on the show. He'll be back soon. Ryan Brandt's been doing an incredible job with us, both producing, and it's been a lot of fun having him on the warm-up. But We'll get Remo back with the team, and that'll be good. And I guess to close, I will say this about all the guys at TSN 1290, not to mention a guy that when I'm not working listens all the time. We miss hockey. We miss the Illegal Curve boys on the station, and I hope we get you guys back sooner as opposed to later, along with hockey.
That would be that is a very nice finishing thought, and we'll leave it there. That's Andrew Hustler Paterson. We're also joined by Dave Minuk, Ezra Ginsberg. I'm your host, Drew Mandel. This has been the third edition of the Illegal Curve Zoomcast. If you're enjoying what you're hearing and you're watching us on YouTube, click the subscribe button. You can get updates sent to you automatically whenever we post another edition of this. Usually we record them on Thursdays, post them on Fridays, something like that. And of course, if you're listening on the podcast version, rate us, review us, subscribe to us. Let us know what you think of the program. Like Hustler said, hopefully we'll be back on TSN Radio 1290 sooner rather than later. We'll keep you abreast on those developments on our Twitter feed at Illegal Curve. And of course, illegalcurve.com, your home for all your latest Winnipeg Jets, Manitoba Moose news and audio. For Ezzy, for Huss, for Dave, I'm your host, Drew Mandel. Thanks for joining us on the Illegal Curve Zoomcast.